What happens when two bass road warriors spend quality time talking music and life with one of their peers? Bassist, educator, author David C. Gross and bassist and head honcho of KnowYourBassPlayer.com, Tom Semioli, trade dates with the legends of rock, jazz, funk, blues, folk, country, and more. Notes from an Artist, revealing conversations with the legends who've created the soundtrack of our lives. What happens? You're about to find out. It's another episode of Notes from an Artist.
David, very interesting guest we have this evening for our audience member. He's an author, he is a photographer, he's a bass player just like we are, recording artist, and he used to be in a band too.
That's right. He was in a band, I think they called themselves the Rolling Stones.
Rolling Stones. Where did they get that name?
I think it was from Muddy Waters.
I think that's who it was. I think it was the Muddy Waters. Okay, check your Stones history. Bill Wyman left the Rolling Stones. He was in the Stones from the very beginning, from 62 to 93. And when he left in 93, you thought, my goodness, why would you leave the Rolling Stones? And when you watch and listen to our conversation, Bill, you can see why. So many accomplishments he achieved after he left the Stones. He's written 12 books, books that span fine art to archaeology to the Rolling Stones history, to music history, right? All about the blues. And we learned in this interview that Bill is not only just out promoting his new book, which we have to plug. It's Bill Wyman's Chelsea, From Medieval Village to Cultural Capital on Unicorn Books. But he's also going to write a book about his war experiences, and he has a new record album coming out in late 2023.
Right. And I found this fascinating. While I was editing our interview, when he was talking about his time in the military, did you know that he started playing guitar while he was in Germany in the army? And I just find that fascinating. I find some of the inspirations that all great musicians, and really probably all musicians have. What was the one thing that turned you around and just made you pick up an instrument? I just find that very fascinating. So there you have it.
It's interesting because Bill talks about his army experiences a little bit in this interview, and hopefully we'll get to speak to him at the end of the year about his book, his military book. And when you look at Bill Wyman as compared to the other members of his band, or the band, Bill really had much more of an eclectic, diverse taste in music. And this is really evidenced in Bill's first two solo records, which I highly recommend to our audience. And we'll play some tracks, Monkey Grip and Stone Alone. Just look at the breadth of musicians that he worked with. Leon Russell, Dr. John, Lowell George, Joe Lala, Wayne Perkins, Ronnie Wood. Van Morrison played sax on his second solo record. Danny Kortchmer, Dallas Taylor, Greg Errico, Jim Keltner, of course, Joe Walsh, Al Cooper, the Pointer Sisters. His first two solo records are remarkable albums. And I think if you really want to hear Bill Wyman at his very best, do check out the Rolling Stones movie, Ladies and Gentlemen, the Rolling Stones. I think that was the tour, yes, the tour that promoted Exile on Main Street. And kind of odd that he played a lot of the bass tracks on Stones records. And you see how great Bill was and why they didn't just have him come in and overdub some of the tracks. We'll never know. And I don't think we care to know. I don't think we want to know.
I don't think it really matters.
It doesn't matter. Such a great player, disciple of Willie Dixon. To really hear Bill Wyman and what a remarkable player he was, go back to the early Stones records. And of course, in America, they all had black covers, right, David? And do take a chance to rediscover Satanic Majesty's Request. It's a great album. Bill has his own song on there, In Another Land, kind of a spooky psychedelic song. But again, it just shows
you. And Tom, as you and I were talking, I think that album cover far supersedes Sgt. Pepper, because who in their right mind is going to put a 3D plastic cover on their record? I mean, A, it was expensive. B, the chances of it breaking were much better. But it's as if, with the competition between the Beatles and the Stones, the good guys, the bad guys, right? They literally embraced, okay, you got Sgt. Pepper, and Satanic Majesties, I think, when you listen carefully to it, was a really good record.
It is. I think, again, we rediscovered we have to break away from the critics and you know how we feel about critics, right? I often mentioned Frank Zappa, his opinion, which was people who can't write interviewing people who can't talk for people who can't read. Of course, we're the exception to that. So yes, that album really probably didn't get a fair shake in its day, but it's great to go back and listen to it, and we'll certainly play tracks from it, and we always do on our shows.
And, I want to go back to your Willie Dixon thing,
yes,
Tom. I think the one song from the very first albums, what typifies Bill's sound is I'm a King Bee.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that.
I think we're going to play that in our show. One thing I want to tell all of our listeners, when we started the show way back 2 years ago, we would intersperse the music within the interview. Now, we think the interview deserves to be in one whole piece. So as you've noticed over the last, let's say, 15, 20 interviews, we play the interview and then we do a playlist of all the songs. And we're going to continue that kind of thing. And of course, it works really wonderfully. So you can get your podcast, go to Buzzsprout, go to Spotify. And as Tom says, wherever podcasts are potted, you'll get the full interview. And then you have a playlist you can click on and hear all the songs that we were talking about and thinking about playing.
Very good, David. Very good. Our audience member is very glad that you updated them on our modus operandi. It's fascinating the depth of history that Bill uncovers of this borough. It's mind-blowing, as you comment. We go from Bram Stoker to the Rolling Stones, and all the photographs in the book are by him. Bill,
Tom, did you know, speaking of Bram Stoker?
Tom,
did you know, speaking of Bram Stoker, he could have been a stroker, but
I'm sure he was.
It's a different show. But Bram was actually short for Abraham.
I didn't know that, David. I'll see.
Well, you should read the book a little bit more carefully, Mr. Semioli.
Well, it's great when your bass heroes are the people you like them to be. And Bill was very affable, very friendly, very good sense of humor. You can see he's still enamored with celebrity. He talks about meeting celebrities in Los Angeles. He talks about a little bit about his prostate cancer. He's a survivor, as I am. Also, I highly recommend folks out there to watch The Quiet One, the documentary on Bill Wyman. And it's said in the movie that if you want to know what happened, you have to ask Bill Wyman. And really, I mean, he even in our interview, he cites his own memory. He has a remarkable memory. And I don't know about you, David, but if I can only talk to one Rolling Stone, if we could only interview one Rolling Stone, the first guy that comes to mind is the former William Perks, Bill Wyman.
Absolutely. But I wanted to tell you something about the celebrity, which I found very endearing. He was telling a story, you'll hear it in the interview, when he was on the King's Road and they were shopping for clothes. He'd run into everyone from Terrence Stamp to Michael Caine. And he was talking about these celebrities as if, well, Bill, you were in the Rolling Stones, for God's sakes. You were a celebrity.
Yeah, exactly. It's really amazing. I guess he just didn't realize his own status. And as we've said, so many actors, Johnny Depp, Anthony Bourdain, the great author, they all want to be rock stars. They all want to be a rock and roll star. And even though they're great actors and writers in their own right, they really find to be a rock star. It's very interesting. We were revealing to Bill that we're both bass players, which of course we talked about with his publicist. And thank you, Clementine. You did a fabulous job setting up this interview, that I could not afford his Mustang bass, so I had to buy one at a used shop. And Bill sold his Rolling Stones Mustang bass for $380,000. It's the highest price ever paid for an electric bass, for a bass guitar.
Now, did he throw in a new set of strings? That's a good question.
No, I don't. The strings were extra. But yeah, great. Again, when you look at so many of the great books he's written, Bill Wyman's Blues Odyssey, his autobiography, Stone Alone, which is highly recommended. Bill Wyman's Treasure Islands, where he talks about Britain's history uncovered. That's his archaeology book. Stones from the Inside, a beautiful photo book of all his photographs. Wyman Shoots Chagall, Mark Chagall.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, there you go. And then there's Bill Wyman's Scrapbook, which is sort of odds and ends. And really a book that everyone has to see, The Rolling Stones, A History in Cartoons. And it's all the political cartoons and entertainment cartoons and characters of the Stones and how they were perceived back in the day as these shaggy, dangerous, long-haired rock and rollers, when really they were entertainers, and they still are entertainers.
Really, really think about influence. So many bands were touched.
You remember the Stones a little bit better than I do, but I'll never forget the quote that Tom Petty rendered in his documentary. He says, when we saw the Beatles, you could never imagine yourself being a Beatle. They were so perfect. The way they played, the way they appeared, their look. There was no way you could imagine yourself being one of the Beatles. But then, a few weeks later on the Ed Sullivan Show, the Rolling Stones come along. And of course, they're the anti-Beatles in terms of sound and fashion. And you watch the Stones and you said, you know what? I think we could do this.
And as Dean Martin said on the Hollywood Bowl,
right?
What is the Hollywood Palace? It was a
Hollywood
TV
Palace.
show, a variety show.
I've been
Right
rolled.
before the Stones came on, ladies and gentlemen, these are the Rolling Stones, and I was rolled when I was stoned.
No! Something for the youngsters. 5 singing boys from England who sold a lot of albums. They're called the Rolling Stones. I've been rolled while I was stoned myself. So I don't know what they're singing about, but here they are at.
And the Stones were insulted by that. They didn't take kindly to that. And yeah, he was very condescending, Dean Martin. And my gosh, in just a few years, the Rolling Stones superseded Dean Martin and that whole Rat Pack in terms of cultural impact, at least for the 60s. I can't speak for the 50s. I wasn't there, nor were you. So again, this is an essential book, Bill Wyman's Chelsea. I can't wait to go back to Chelsea. And with this book in hand.
Tom and I will be going to London end of October, beginning in November. And we're going to take this book, which beats any of Fodor's books. That's for darn sure.
All right, let's get going. Let's bring Bill Wyman on Notes from an Artist.
Here he is.
Oh, yes, and it's a great pleasure to begin the fantastic, fabulous, Billy Wyman. All right.
There's Bill Wyman. Hello, Bill.
Hello.
Hi.
Bill, I assume you are in Chelsea, yes?
Yeah, I'm in my house in Chelsea, yeah.
Okay, I can recommend a very good book about
And
Chelsea.
that's Clem, you see, who's my PA.
Hey, there you are, Clem. Thanks for...
Hi, Clem. My darling Clementine, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
All right, we'll introduce Clem afterwards. Okay. But welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Great to have you. Bill Wyman's Chelsea, From Medieval Village to Cultural Capital, is out now on Unicorn Books, David. Did you know that?
I had a feeling. I'm not quite sure, though.
You know, Bill is
But it came out on the 31st of May, and a week later it went into a second printing.
Oh, that's fabulous. By the way, Bill, just a quick aside. John Altman says hi, and he'll be contacting you soon to catch up.
Oh, yeah. All right.
Getting back to the book, you know, Bill, David, is a very prolific writer. You've written Bill Wyman's Blues Odyssey, right? 2001.
This is my 12th book.
12th book. There's Bill Wyman's Treasure Islands. Bill's History of the Blues. We'll get to that one. Bill Wyman shoots Chagall, and by shoots, he means photographs, not shoot. That was a good one. There's Bill Wyman's Scrapbook. There's The Stones' History in Cartoons, which is a fascinating look at how...
Yeah, that was fun to do.
That was a fun one.
I bet.
Now, Bill, David and I share your love for history. David has authored 18 books. I worked...
Beating me.
Yeah, you'll catch up. You've got time. I worked as a print and television journalist for 20 years, but don't hold that against me. We are all bass players. And I think our love of history...
Yeah, I can see one behind you.
That's my Mustang. I couldn't afford the one you were selling, so I got one at 30th Street Guitars in Manhattan. But I think our love of history is born to the fact that the bass instrument is the foundation of music, and history is the foundation of society. And society needs historians. We can't go forward unless we know where we come from. And this Chelsea book, I think to fully appreciate and experience Chelsea, you need to look at how Chelsea evolved. Was that your inspiration for writing the book?
No, my inspiration was my first idea was to do a book on London, Water Street, and then I suddenly realized that it would be Encyclopedia Britannica. You know, it'd be just too much. So I just focused on Chelsea then. But that took me about 4 years because I decided to just walk the streets and sort of take photos of anything that was unusual, you know, out of the ordinary. And then I did that. I walked about 70 streets of Chelsea, every street, and just photographed 1,800 photos, and then worked on the history of every street, who lived in what streets, you know, what house, who lived there, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And I built it over 2 years then, after taking photos on and off for about 5 or 6 years before.
You express your love for Chelsea in the first paragraph of the book. And, of course, it's divided into several sections. You've
got the book. All right, that's good.
Of course. Yes, it's got it right here. Clem sent us a copy.
And we actually read the books that we get. Isn't that amazing?
Well, I think it's unusual.
Yes, it is. But it's divided into several sections. It's miscellany, which puts the book into historical context or the content. The itineraries, which subdivide into history, art, music, and fashion. And then the Chelsea streets, as you mentioned, just absolutely fascinating.
And all the famous people that lived in Chelsea. And then there's all the famous houses and buildings from way back.
Well, that was one of the things that really blew my mind. Some of the greatest minds of the last 10 centuries lived in Chelsea. Thomas More, Henry James. It's just fascinating to see all those people.
Yeah. And what's it? Bram Stoker. And
right.
Who wrote, well, you know him. And there's everybody.
During your time in Chelsea, did artists go there because it was affordable? Like, for example, David and I in New York City, Greenwich Village was affordable.
Yeah, exactly.
Artists congregated there. Of course, in Greenwich Village, we depended on the wealthy uptown New Yorkers to come and listen to jazz and buy art. Was that the similar situation for you?
Well, it is in a way, isn't it? I regard it as one of the two villages in London. You know, it's all part of the same town, but it's more it got more of a village feel about it. And there's another village called Dulwich. Sometimes you even have to pay a toll to go through certain roads because they're private. And so I think of those two as the villages in London. And what they loved about Chelsea was it was by the water. It was out of the way. They could go there like just for the day, really. They could go on the boat up the Thames. So people started to go just for the days and all that. And then they had entertainment here and all kinds of stuff, as you would read in the book. And then famous people started to actually have their houses here, like Thomas More, like Henry VIII. Right. And so on. And then you find that all the very famous families that started to live here, the streets are named after them.
Right.
Yeah, they are, and buildings and all that. You know, it's amazing when you start getting into it. And I get fed up of walking the streets and seeing people walking along with their heads down, looking at the ground or on their phones. You know, and nobody looks at these wonderful buildings and they do it all over London as well, because London's an amazing city and it's full of parks and greenery in the streets, trees. Squares where it's all greenery, you know, and then you got the river, and it's just there's no better place. And that's why I decided to live here in 1982 when I came back from being exiled, you know, tax exile in France.
One of my favorites is your
and then Chelsea. Charlie moved here. Mick and Keith had houses on the Embankment for a while, and so on and so forth.
Well, I was saying you documented Chelsea door knockers, and you took the photos. Were any of the residents, did they catch you, or did you ask?
No, no, I just did it with a long lens, you know, okay. from the pavement, and I had dozens of them, but I thought they were kind of fun and interesting. You know, you got kingfishers with a little fish in its mouth, then you got whales and elephants and lions. Of course, there's lions everywhere. It was just very interesting, so I thought it'd be nice to do a double page on it. So we used the best ones, the most interesting ones, the most different ones.
On my next trip, David, we're going to have to go up and look at the door knockers. We're going to.
That's it. Well, we're going to be there sometime the end of October.
Okay. My birthday. All right.
Okay. Well, now we'll know how to get around Chelsea. It's interesting. You see the character of Chelsea, but London, like all other cities, is modernizing. One of the things that's happening here in New York is that all this new construction is going up. And I noticed that when I was in London last in 2019. And matter of fact, Johnny Lydon did a documentary about that, about how the new construction isn't conforming, an odd word for Johnny Lydon to use, to London's history. Do you feel that, what about Chelsea? To me, Chelsea still retains that historical aesthetic.
Yeah, it hasn't changed too much. Mm-hmm. I mean, when they built the Embankment, of course, in the 1890s, everything changed because everything was down to the river and sometimes things got flooded. But they were all beer parlors and fun houses and smoking houses and all kinds of things down there. And all the artists lived that way, and took photos and painted. So when the Embankment went up, it did change a lot of things, and we did lose quite a few of the old streets and old buildings and everything. But it still retains its, it's a little bit of magic for me, and that's why I decided when I came back from France after 11 years, where would I want to live in, in London in the future. future, and I decided on Chelsea, of course, and I've been here for the last 40 years now.
You mentioned that you had several flats in Chelsea, so you moved around, yes?
Well, you do, don't you, when they're leased, because the leases run out, and then the guy who owns it wants to triple the rent all of a sudden, so you have to move. And also, of course, I found this lovely penthouse suite above the Alexander Fleming house, who invented penicillin. He's on Danvers Street. I had the penthouse there with 3 bedrooms, and it was wonderful. I got married after I just left the Stones. Right. I got married, and we started to have children, and then we ran out of bedrooms. Yeah. We had 3 bedrooms, us, nanny, baby, and then the second baby comes, put them together. They cry all the time, don't they? They wake each other up all the time. So it was time to move on. So I moved on to the house where we are now. But, it was moving until you find the one that you really want to be in forever.
And of course, going street by street, I couldn't help but notice some of the names from songs by Ray Davies, by Ian Hunter, by Graham Parker, Charing, Chelsea Cross, Hasker Street, and of course King's Road. How many British songwriters have evoked memories of King's Road? So there's a lot of rock and roll history.
Yeah, but also a lot of celebrity people.
Yeah.
So when you'd go shopping down the King's Road in the early 60s and look for, outfits, jackets, clothes, dandy fashions and all those Mr. Fish, all those shops that you used to go into, and go into the boot shops as well, you'd bump into Michael Caine and then Twiggy and then Roger Moore and then, all these famous people. And you were just able to go over and just shake their hands and say, I love you, and so you're always bumping into these people all the time. I mean, Princess Di and the Princes all used to come up and down here.
Wow.
And now Prince William's wife shops down the King's Road. It's that kind of thing. And it was just wonderful to just see all these, bump into Terence Stamp, And it was never ending. You never knew who you might bump into when you were shopping, because they were shopping too, because it was a great place to come. You had the shops, you had the restaurants, you had the cinemas, and you had the two theatres, Sloane Square and the one up the World's End. And then you had the river. You walk through and you got the river, and then you got Battersea Park, and it's an amazing place.
We never ran into these people, David. How come? I don't know. Why is that?
I run into more llamas and bears while I'm up here in Connecticut than I do celebrities at this point in time.
Well, I used to do it in Los Angeles. I once bumped into Betty Hutton, and she had 3 boyfriends, young boys with her, but she signed a $2 note for me,
Wow.
And I saw other celebrities, and I was too embarrassed to go over and sort of say hello, because being American and I was English, but when you're in England, you don't mind asking an English person.
Bill, there are a couple of things in the book that really struck home for me. One in particular, the lyric Chelsea drugstore turned into a McDonald's. But what was so funny about that for me is, of course, you remember Murray the K.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, he introduced our first shows in New York.
Right. Well, I guess it was 1967, he did an Easter show at the R.K. O'Keefe Theater, which was on 3rd Avenue between 58th and 57th Street. And that is now a McDonald's townhouse.
I know, it's horrible, isn't it?
And the other thing that really...
hang on, just the pub that I went to join the beginnings of the Stones before Charlie, as well, there was just Mick, Keith, Brian messing about, was at World's End, Chelsea, and it was the Weatherby Arms pub. But that now is a betting shop. It's... And you do this worse than us, because you seem to change buildings when they're 30 years old. At least we keep some of the old ones.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Tom and I actually were speaking about that, how over here we'll just tear it down, where in Europe you keep trying to keep everything as it were.
Well, you like to build up heritage, don't you? And Paris is a typical example as well, and Venice and all these places are magnificent, and you don't change anything unless it's collapsing,
Yeah. My last trip to Paris with my late wife, she lived in Paris for 12 years, and I was very impressed in Paris how the new construction complemented the old construction. Now, I'm in a building here. My apartment in Manhattan is 60 years old, and that's an old building. But it's right. It's ready for demolition. Now, Chelsea obviously has its own aesthetic. It maintains its aesthetic, I would assume, because the city fathers keep it that way. What are your thoughts about the rest of London? Is it
Well, we are having problems because they put in bicycle lanes everywhere.
Yeah,
and
they
so
have that
all the
here.
streets have lost one. It's hard for the traffic now because they've lost, what do you call it?
Lanes.
A lane, yeah. And so you see when you go up Park Lane, it's like solid. You've got 2 lanes now instead of 4. It's solid. And you look on the cycle lane and there's one cyclist going up there. And you've got like 200 cars trying to get up to the top of Marble Arch, And just across to Hyde Park, just over the fence,
Right.
there's a cycle lane. But they've put one in the street as well. And now they've turned everything down to 20 miles an hour. And if you do 22 miles an hour, you get fined and you have 3 points on your license.
Right. And do you get compliant with the cameras, right?
It's really, really bad. Taxi drivers have a problem. We all have problems. I've been done twice for 22 and 26 miles an hour. Pay fines and have 3 points on your license. Like you would get the same if you're doing 105 on the motorway. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous. Speeding at 22, you know what I mean? Speeding fine. That's the sad part of what's going on at the moment in London.
We're facing the same thing here in New York City, but again,
causes more congestion and more pollution. Okay, and that's what they were trying to sort out a few years ago.
I don't know if you know this at this point now, they're talking about congestion pricing in Manhattan, which means
we do that already here.
Oh, you do? Yeah, you go below 60th Street.
We've been doing it for about 10 years. We have 2 prices we have to pay.
Yeah.
One for where you are and one for, your exhaust. If you're not you haven't got a car that's got a clean engine or whatever. I don't know. I see a piece of art behind you. What is it?
Which one, me?
There, right down the bottom.
That is a filmmaker friend of mine.
Down the bottom here.
Oh, David has, yes. He lives
David.
in a much nicer house than I do.
What is it? It's very nice.
Thank you. Essentially, Bill, my wife's a filmmaker, and she just curated an art show up here in Connecticut of all of the artists from down on the Lower East Side.
Okay.
So this name is Christos Tatos. And
a bit Picasso-ish, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
In a more of a round way, though, more curves and everything than Picasso would use. But
what's so interesting is when the gallery show ended, our garage became the house for all of the artwork. So when Christos came to the house, he said, "Anything you like?" And I said, "Yeah, I like that one." He said, "It's yours."
No, that's great, isn't it?
Well, Bill, when you do a book on Danbury, Connecticut, then by all means, visit David's house. David, did you know that the Chelsea bun was a favorite of King George II? That's the official.
Oh, yeah, there's that. In fact, if you look at the back of the book, they show you how to make it.
Oh,
just
yes,
inside,
that's right.
Inside the back page, you see how you've got all the directions of how to make it.
And I also noticed, I don't know if it's your photograph of the statue of Thomas More at the Chelsea Old Church.
They're all my photos, all the modern photos.
I just thought he resembled Steve Hackett of Genesis, who we had on our show. So I don't know if there's any relation.
Thomas More is a hero of mine, someone who stuck by his beliefs and suffered the consequences.
Yes.
Which used to happen to the Stones.
And I love your story about Lord Hee-Haw.
Yeah. The Haw-Haw, that he was called.
Haw-Haw, that's it.
Yeah. Well, I used to hear him because I was a little kid in the war, My grandmother used to listen to the radio, and I lived with her in the wartime. In fact, that's my next book. It's coming out in the autumn. It's already with publishers. And it's called Billy and the Wars. And it's my first 10 years of my life when I lived in wartime London with the bombs and going to school with the bombing going on and living in air raid shelters and all that sort of stuff. And,
that must be fascinating.
Well, being bombed out twice as well, and somewhere else and so on. And losing friends at school who were killed, in bombings. And I've tried to make it as interesting as possible because I remember everything. I do have a good memory. I'm very OCD and almost autistic. I think I got a bit of autistic in me because I do remember most everything, even right the way back to when I was about 3.
And you served in the RAF.
Yeah, well, that was necessary. Yeah,
right.
And when I was old enough, I was old enough to be called up, whereas the rest of them were a bit younger than me, and they didn't have to suffer. Ian Stewart did, the piano player, but I was in Germany, but it was very fortunate because while I was in Germany, we were right next to the American zone, British zone, American zone French zone at the bottom. And we heard the beginnings of rock and roll on AFN, American Forces Network Radio.
Yes, sir, it's the GI Journal again, your radio newspaper of the AEF, the paper that prints all your contributions from overseas.
And that's where I heard in 1955, I heard the beginnings of rock and roll, Elvis, Fats Domino, and so on and so on. And I went down to the American PSI shop and I bought the first little records, the little 45s, the first ones. And I didn't know how to play them. I used an old wind up and tore them to bits. Didn't have the record players to play them, but I did want them because I used to hear them on the jukebox and, down the road from the, at the camp where we used to have drinks and things.
Interesting that, Bill, we've had some of your friends on the show. We've had John Altman. We've had Leo Lyons of 10 Years After. We've had Mo Foster, who's played with everyone.
Yeah.
And it's always a fascinating thing to David. What was it about American blues, this black music that was born of slavery, that spoke to your generation? What was it about that music that enchanted you?
It was just different. It was not difficult, or it didn't seem to be difficult until you started to work on it, and then you found it wasn't as difficult as it sounded. It wasn't as easy as it sounded. And it was like the black man's pop music, wasn't it, really, at the time? And we just heard it as being very different and very interesting. And it wasn't being played on the radio or TV in England. You couldn't buy the records. There was just a few people that had imported records. And because I used to write away for Chuck Berry records in 1957, 58, when I was in the military in Germany, because you couldn't buy them in the shops. Get Duane Eddy, his first ones, Rebel Rouser and all those kind of stuff. It was really exciting. And that's where I first picked up a guitar in Germany and then moved on. When I came out, formed a little band. And at the same time, Mick and Keith were forming a band in Dartford. Brian was doing stuff in Cheltenham. And so on and so on. I'm not going into any more of that history.
Yeah, getting
it's
back
been
to
written
Chelsea,
too many times.
A few times. Getting back to Chelsea, talk about all this convergence of artists and actors and musicians and things. And this is before the digital age. This is before things like Zoom. Do you think what happens in Chelsea could happen again? Because now, as you know, we're in 3 different parts of the world on this radio show. You can make a record on your iPhone, right?
Yeah.
Can a scene like you were part of in Chelsea or what's happening today, could that happen again? Or is that just a product of the older times, I guess?
I don't think it could happen again, no. I don't think everybody loves the 60s, don't they? Because it never happened in the 70s or 80s and 90s. It just isn't. It's just a unique time. It's like the Roaring 20s, isn't it? Or the Girl with the Flappers and all that, that never happened after that, although everybody loved it. No, there are certain times for certain things and they're wonderful times. It was like being in a hurricane or something, like a, what would you call it? Like in the center of a tornado. Everything was like flying and changing. Everything was going so fast. Art was changing, music, fashion, theatre, movies. It was changing. Everything was changing, and more young people were getting more involved. And then you had the birth pill, which sort of changed most everything on that side. Right. For ladies who weren't able to enjoy themselves as much in the past, but suddenly they could, and be safe, which was very rare. And there was all this kind of amazing stuff. And people did start to integrate a bit more, the different types. Like I say, the movie people, the theatre people, the musicians, artists, poets, writers, they started to meet each other a bit more in restaurants and so on and so on. And it became much more something special, which wasn't there before. It never did happen since. And I don't think it will. How can it? Right. It's a different life. Now, I go to a restaurant, you see a couple with their 2 children having dinner, and they're all on their phones. The 4 of them are all on their phone. They're not talking. They're just eating, and they're all on their individual phone. It's ridiculous. And that's not going to change unless electricity dies on us. And that'll be the end of the world, because everything focuses on electricity. If we haven't got that, we haven't got anything, have we?
Well, it just seems like, especially in the music business, you had to be in London to be in New York. You had to be in LA or Nashville. And now
or Memphis.
Or Muscle Shoals.
Yeah.
Or Detroit, all that. So, I don't think any...
New Orleans.
Chicago.
Yeah, one of my favorite places for music.
What's a day in Chelsea like for you now?
Bloody hot. No, I mean, we've got a bit of a heat wave over the last few weeks. It's been up to, do you use Celsius or Fahrenheit.
No, but we can convert it for our listeners.
But no, I'm Fahrenheit, but of course everybody's Celsius now, and we're going up to like 29 and 30 some days, which is in the 80s, high 80s in Fahrenheit. And it really is hot. I mean, Clem can tell you that. She just walked in and she said, "Get me a glass of ice water, please." It's baking, and it's difficult in the houses because we don't have central heating. I mean, air conditioning like you do. It's not a natural thing for us. Some people do, right. But it's quite rare. And so London at the moment is baking hot and very dry.
There was another instance in your book that struck home for me. When my sister ran away from home, which most girls of 16 and 17 do, she moved into the St. Moritz with Judy Garland because her best friend at school was Lorna Luft. So the two of them are at the St. Moritz in 1969 and they get the call. And obviously they were at, Judy was at Mickey Dean's house when she passed, and you brought that up in the book. And
that little Muse cottage it was.
Yeah. And what I found
Kings Road, just opposite a very popular restaurant called the Ivy now, is the house where Judy Garland got married, and her best man was Johnny Ray. And there's all those kind of things I've found, I've found where Edward VIII met Wallis Simpson in the house up the road from where I'm living, and extraordinary things. The more I delved, the more I found, I love doing that. I love research. I love digging and trying to find little bits and pieces of things that are unexpected. That's half my pleasure.
When did you decide you had enough material? Because, like I say, the more you dig, the more you find out. It seems like
it's like making records, isn't it? You have to come to a point where you don't want to put any more instruments on. That enough is enough, and if you're doing the mixing, enough's enough. You've had 3 shots at it. Stop, finish it. That's it. And that's the way I always feel about my books, but I always try to get them as complete and full and exact as I possibly can before I do that. But you do have to stop and say that is enough. And I think artists do that as well. When I knew Marc Chagall and I used to go to his atelier in France, he had all these paintings all around the room. And I said, "Marc, when do you know the paintings are finished?" And he said, "Well, when I think a painting is finished, I take it in the garden and I put it in amongst the flowers. And if it looks good, it's finished. But if it don't look good, then I have to take it and make the painting better." And it's the same thing. How do you know a painting's finished? You can try changing things and all that. It's the same kind of thing.
All right. Well, Bill, obviously to complement the show, we want to play some songs. We do have music on the show that represented the district, the borough of Chelsea. What would you suggest? Give us some suggestions.
What represents Chelsea?
Yeah.
God knows. I've never thought of that in a way.
Okay.
I know musicians lived here, but I always thought more on the artist level. More artists lived here and entertainers. I wouldn't like to. I couldn't choose one. You said there's quite a few,
Well, I don't want to go to Chelsea. I don't think that would be appropriate.
I don't know that one. Because I do want to go to Chelsea.
And then there's Chelsea Girls, but that's Nico. That's Chelsea in New York City. So
that's correct.
Yeah, you nicked all the names of our towns, didn't you? You've got all English towns in Cambridge and Oxford and all those, Boston, and they're all old English names, aren't they?
Right.
As a matter of fact, I have a house up in Cape Cod, and it's in the town of Falmouth.
Yeah, there you go. That's where my youngest daughter got a degree in animation in Falmouth University down in Cornwall. Yeah, it's very interesting because someone says, I've been to, I live in so and so and so and so, and I think, yeah, that's a town in England.
Yeah.
But it's nice. It's been spread. All right. I think we're done, aren't we?
We are, Bill. Thanks for being on the show. We'll definitely have you back on when you publish your next book. When does that due?
We're talking about sort of September-ish.
Okay.
Because I had them both ready at the same time, but I couldn't put them both out because I wouldn't be able to promote both of them at the same time. Right. And then I've got a solo album coming out about the same time as well, which I've been working on. And that's finished and mixed, but that's being delayed until the autumn as well.
Okay, all right. And any gigs with the Rhythm Kings coming up?
No, that's finished now.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't do that anymore. I stopped 3 years ago when I got prostate cancer, when I got it, and I got cured, but I had 15 months of treatment, so I couldn't put road.
Right.
And that was kind of enough. The rest of the band kind of went on and did their things. And I didn't feel like staying in cold hotels on horrible beds and looking, trying to get room service when there weren't any. And I think I don't need those days anymore, so I kind of gave that up and focused more on stuff at home.
Right. And you can't get Chelsea buns on the road, David. So why bother? Why leave Chelsea? Bill, thanks for being a guest on the show. Thank you, Clem, if you're listening. And we'll send you the links when all this stuff airs. And
Clem, come here and say goodbye.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was brilliant.
Oh, my darling, oh, my darling, oh, my darling, Clevian time.
So much good luck with the book.
Appreciate
Congratulations. All right. Bye-bye, guys.
You.
So long now.
Thank you. It's been fun.
It has.
Thank you.
David, a fascinating conversation with Bill Wyman, author,
What
recording
a
artist,
great
bass
guy.
player. Really a stand-up gent, and I look forward to speaking with him again. For those
Oh,
of
he
you,
doesn't want to speak to you. He wants to speak to me. That's
only
what
to
the
you,
story
yes.
is.
Okay, we'll go through an
Yes.
interpreter to speak to me. But you can listen to this interview in its entirety on our podcast, which can be potted at Amazon, Apple, Buzzsprout, Spotify, and wherever else you
And
guys
now
get-
YouTube, right?
And now YouTube. So wherever else you get your podcast, we again, like we've mentioned all throughout, we hope to see Bill again at the end of the year and talk to him about his new album and his upcoming book about his time in the RAF. So thank you, Bill Wyman. Thank you, Clementine, for all your efforts. Great show, guys.
Take care. We'll see you next week.